Okay, welcome everyone to this new webinar on the series of webinars on cultural education that is organized by the IFAC Technical Committee on 9.4 on cultural education. And this is done in cooperation with the IEEE Control System Society Technical Committee on Cultural Education as well. It's a great pleasure for me today to introduce Anja Garone from the Vrije University of Brussels. She got a PhD in Educational Sciences on Faculty Professional Development, and she has worked on many educational projects that include faculty professional development, educational technology, curriculum development, and intercultural competencies. Currently, she is managing the Brussels Institute for Advanced Studies, overseeing the logistics of the current program of sustainable robotics, AI, and automation. Today, Anja, we talk about teachers in control, making science sense of higher education trends and policy. Thank you very much, Anja, for being here. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Antonio, and thank you for having me. And to all of you who are present here today, thank you also for that introduction. I just want to quickly start with the webinar outline. I will discuss some key pedagogical concepts in higher education and also the current trends and hot topics in higher education, followed by a quick discussion on professors in control and their perceptions about teaching. And then once we stop the recording, we will then have a small joint discussion on how teaching and control is organized. And that is when I will invite all of you to give your opinions as well on these topics. About me a little bit, yes, Antonio, you have said a little bit about me already. I'm originally actually South African, but I worked as a nurse in Finland and intensive care for around 6 years until I did my master's in educational sciences, where I focused on multilingual education. Then I continued in a PhD in faculty professional development, as Antonio already mentioned. And then I worked as a lecturer and educational researcher in Leuven for around 2 years until I started here as a manager of the Brussels Institute for Advanced Studies. And currently we're running the program on sustainable robotics, AI, and automation as well. Maybe this is one thing that I can add as well, and that you can decide for yourself if this is in my favor or not. But I am in fact married to a professor in control education for around 10 years now. And so this has, I can say this has informed a lot of my opinions as well that I will present today. Let's dive into some key pedagogical contents, concepts and topics. I think most of you will probably say this is nothing new, and you will be right. I will just gloss over this a little bit, but I do want to set the stage a little bit about what we're talking about when it comes to higher education and how teaching is organized in higher education. So when we start with faculty professional development, we usually start with this argument on do we know what is the difference between pedagogy and didactics? These are two terms that are often intertwined. But they are in fact different things. And for instance, when it comes to pedagogy, pedagogy is the science of teaching, the science of learning and studying how teaching is organized as well. The main author of many of these pedagogical models and frameworks that we use to this day is John Dewey, who was the mastermind behind a lot of the education, how the education system is organized in Western education, in particular in the US. Didactics, on the other hand, is it comes from Greek, meaning to the art to teach, the art of teaching. And this is basically the practitioners, the teachers who stand in front of the classroom, they know how to teach. One funny remark that I often hear from teachers is that they say, yeah, pedagogues, they like to tell us how to teach while we actually know how to teach. Beside that, one of the key frameworks for teaching in front of a classroom is pedagogical content knowledge. Content knowledge is knowing your subject. So for instance, mathematics, control engineering, languages, what you want, and knowing how to teach that. So that's the pedagogical knowledge. And Schulman, he officialized this in 1986 with the pedagogical content knowledge framework. Nowadays, however, we have technology also coming into the picture. And so we talk more about the TPEC, which is the technological pedagogical content knowledge. So when we train teachers and we train faculty, we make an emphasis that the technology, pedagogical aspect and content aspect all have to align. And for this, we have a really beautiful framework called the TPAC framework. And this big circle around there that you see, it is about the context. So context is still very, very important when you stand in front of the classroom, knowing who your students are and where they are and the situation that you find yourself in, and knowing how to approach teaching in that. Just a short notice that all the references that I mentioned here, they are in my slides, at the back of my slides, and I will also, if Antonio would like that, I can share these slides as well with the community afterwards. Then continuing on the same concept, constructivism and constructive alignment are very important concepts in pedagogy today. Most of you will know these terms already. If you have written any teaching dossier, you will know about constructive alignment. Constructivism is not new at all. It originally comes from the idea of learners understanding how learners use their previous knowledge in order to learn. And constructive alignment is the art of understanding how to use that previous knowledge together with their needs, their current needs in the classroom, and with the needs after they finish with their studies afterwards, what they're going to do with that knowledge outside of the classroom, and aligning all of these subjects together so that you know that what you're teaching is going to eventually be also useful for the students. From constructivism and constructive alignment, we have student-centered approaches that sprang up from this, also with the need for social justice in education. We see this particular from the reforms that happened in American education with the various acts on education. So, for instance, the No Child Left Behind Act, the Power to Teach All Act, the various acts that's happened in politics in the US, and also that continue to shape education in the Western world. Student-centered approaches are normally what you find like group work, allowing the students to have autonomy in choosing how they learn, what they learn, these personalized learning plans that they can make up. These are particularly effective also in school education, but then more and more coming into higher education as well. Some crucial literature on this that you can look up for yourself if you want to know more about the history of constructivism in sociology. And in the sociology of education, there's a lovely book by Young who wrote on this. And then more on constructive alignment by John Biggs, that talks about the fundamental aspects and the fundamental practices for how to constructively align your courses in an effective manner, particularly in higher education. And then, of course, for every framework, you have a critic of the framework. In the world of pedagogy, our disruptor is called Paul Kirchner, a famous professor from the Netherlands, who always has something to say, something interesting also to say, and he always comes up with these explosive remarks and these explosive papers that he publishes. And in the early 2000s, he wrote this, that constructivism doesn't work. And there is also some logic to his argument. He goes on to argue that you cannot construct something from nothing. So if you have bachelor students that are straight from school, coming from high school into university, and they're starting their bachelor degree, they don't have this previous knowledge that they need to construct with. So how are you going to use a constructivist approach for students that don't know what they don't know? However, despite this criticism, there is plenty of evidence to show that in more advanced courses, so if you have third-year bachelor, a little bit more mature students who already have some kind of basis, that these type of approaches, they work very well with master courses especially as well. Continuing on the same trend, everybody will know about learning styles and that they've also been debunked. Not too recently, though. They've been debunked for quite some time now. However, learning styles do surface again and again in educational research and in educational discourse as well. The problem with learning styles is that it was based on opinions and ideas and philosophies and not really on evidence. However, since then, there is another really robust framework called differentiated instruction by Carolyn and Tomlinson, who was a great proponent for inclusion and diversity in schools, and she wrote a really lovely book on this topic, on the differentiated classroom, responding to the needs of all learners. And while her work is mostly focusing on classroom and school learners, the same framework and the same model can also be applied into higher education in certain ways, taking context, of course, into account. And here on your left, you will see again, guess who wrote this article on propagating, that we have to stop propagating the myth of learning styles. And it was, again, Paul Kirschner who wrote about this. And nowadays, if you're an educational scientist and you dare to write something that sounds a little bit like learning styles, you will immediately get a lot of criticism. And in fact, actually, for my PhD, I got this comment from one of the jury members that I was employing learning styles in my PhD, which actually was not the case. So it took me about an hour to argue around this during my defense, but eventually I got there. So on to current trends in higher education. What we see nowadays is that thanks to COVID-19, there was this great online transition, which meant that when we previously talked about blended learning, now we're talking about hybrid learning. We are recording and live streaming our lectures a lot and making our materials online available for the students. We're liking to use technology to engage with our students as well. A little bit about hybrid classrooms. I feel that personally, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I do feel this is kind of a deja vu from the early 2000s. We had already done this back then. And I do remember sitting in a classroom in this big conference room where we had someone on the screen talking and there was a horrible internet connection, there was horrible sound. We tried to ask questions, they couldn't understand. So it didn't work back then. And nowadays, the consensus with a lot of education scientists is that it's not going to work now as well. And quite frankly, a lot of my colleagues, when we were teaching in Leuven, a lot of my colleagues, they were quite annoyed with this whole policy trend towards hybrid classrooms. And we just kept on saying, can't we not go back to how it was before COVID, since COVID is now officially kind of gone. But it does continue to be a policy for higher education. And however, I do see that people are noticing that it is not as useful as it is pictured in this picture here. However, it is more a type of blended learning that they're continuing to call hybrid classroom. So a little bit, I'm not going to dwell too much on this topic, but I think a lot of you will probably have some stronger opinions on this. I normally try to stay a bit more neutral when I talk about teaching in higher education in general. Then what we see a lot in higher education is that students are becoming more and more at the center. So student-centered learning methods are becoming policies in many institutions, and even up to national levels where you have at national level certain approaches to teaching being stipulated. And this has, of course, to do with other things, other trends that are related to this as well that I will get to now. This has to do a lot with, of course, diversity and inclusion. As I mentioned before, we have differentiated instruction. We try to make sure that people can learn no matter what their background is. There are, of course, these massive labor market needs. And we do know that there are critical shortages in healthcare and in teaching and even in the engineering professions, which means that we need to churn out more laborers into the labor market, which means we need to make sure we have enough people graduating from these various programs, which makes diversity and inclusion much more relevant, and you understand where this comes from, this policy. And then, of course, you have the decolonization of education, which is also a really important aspect and an important discussion to be had. As a South African, this is nothing new for me because I was around 10 years old when Mandela became president, and the decolonization of the school and higher education curriculums already started immediately then. So learning about this 10, 20 years later here in Europe, it's it's nice to hear that is reaching these parts as well. However, the concept of decolonization of education has also to do with the diversity and inclusion at heart of the matter, making sure that while previously higher education has always been seen as a privilege and something for the elite, there are more moves and shifts towards making it more inclusive and making it more as an opportunity for all, instead of becoming a gatekeeping institution. A little bit more about differentiation. There is a lovely paper on this that you can read about as well. There are many ways to differentiate. There are frameworks that can help you to do that, but at the core it is knowing who your student is. If they're ready to learn, do they have the necessary prerequisite knowledge? What are their interests and what motivates them to learn, and then learning profile. Learning profile, I actually know there's a fire engine outside here. About these learning profiles, I actually know these researchers that wrote this paper personally. They were my colleagues. We shared an office, actually. And they were the ones that were passionately talking about how learning profile is not the same as learning styles. So that's just a small note on that. What traditionally are inclusive pedagogies in higher education, it's traditionally focused more on learning disabilities and other disabilities, making sure that, so the classical thing is allowing a little bit more time for exams for students that have special needs or that maybe have concentration issues. Whether this is a good thing or not, I'm not here to debate this. It's just these are the policies that happen to dictate these type of things and the ideas behind it. Here is the article about decolonization. You can read this as well. This is very well written, a nice discourse on why it is necessary and how to do it. And Outlook is acting up. And then, yeah, we can continue then as well with the hot topic, the hottest of the hot topics, which is AI. And I think I'm not the only one, but I think we can speak for all of us. We have noticed that it has caused major disruptions in how we assess and evaluate our students. In particular, we cannot ask them to write essays anymore because they're not writing them themselves. And I know that 2 years ago, or even 3 years ago in 2022, I started sounding alarm to my colleagues saying that, listen, these essays were not written by them. I know these students, they did not write this. So this was even before ChatGPT became a big thing, a big mainstream thing. Students were already, they already knew about it. So I think the discourse around AI, it is a little bit hasty and a little bit late, but at least better now than never. There is a very nice paper on this that you can read. It's a report or a statement on assessment reform, the need for assessment reform. I know one of the researchers who wrote this, so they're doing a lot of work on this, and they're doing a lot of work on overhauling and seeing how we can manage to compensate for this and how we can actually use AI for the good and not for the detriment of learning. And to still kind of safeguard that learning does still happen despite AI being a major disruptor in this. Furthermore, so I did mention, and also Antonia mentioned that I studied professional development in higher education, so this is my subject. Normally, what is professional development? It is organized by educational scientists, so someone like me, or from the teacher training institutes of the various educational institutions. Teacher trainers are usually experts in training teachers in schools. And this was one of the recurring conversations that I had with my promoters and with the colleagues that I was sharing office with as well, that their notions of professional development do not necessarily match the needs of higher education lecturers and professors, because professors are not school teachers, because they teach adults. Students are adults, learners are children. And there's a fundamental difference in how you approach teaching in a classroom in a school than in a classroom in a university. There are institutional policies that are popping up around the world for new professors in particular. So for instance, in the Netherlands, it is a national policy that you need to have a training certificate before you can actually teach in a classroom. So normally, if you apply for a position in the Netherlands, it works very much in your advantage if you can really show that you have this training certificate. Otherwise, I think they do give you some time of grace to obtain the certificate. But normally, you're not allowed to stand in front of a classroom autonomously by yourself and teach these students until you have that training certificate. And I think it also affects your ability to gain tenure in the Netherlands. Not an expert on the Netherlands policies, but in Belgium, there's a lot of discourse at the moment on making this a policy as well, in particular in Flanders, and in particular in the university colleges in Flanders as well. However, in this whole discourse of professionalization, we don't really know much about old professors. I say old in inverted commas, but I mean with this experienced professors. So the professors who started teaching before this whole professionalization trend became a thing in the universities. So mainly they're left to their own devices. I can say that for my university, they're a little bit left to their own devices. They're not being forced to do anything or to follow any courses. However, in the university colleges, they do try to include the older lecturers or the more experienced lecturers as well, mainly as mentors for new for new incoming lecturers. In professional development in higher education, we focus a lot on educational technologies and student-centered teaching methods. Surprise, surprise. There are, of course, as I mentioned before, there are conflicts between the disciplines and educational scientists. So, for instance, in 2019, I had to send out was it 2018? I had to send out a survey to 2,000 university teaching staff at my university, asking them how they liked the new learning management system and what they thought about this. And in the survey, I used the technology acceptance model to understand, do they accept it or not? And it was followed by some questions on how do they prefer to professionalize themselves. So I gave them some scenarios they can choose from what they, for instance, that they like to be coached or mentored, or that they like to follow courses that are formally organized, or that they like to learn by themselves. And I remember quite distinctly one of the comments, and I think this professor was an engineer. I'm not sure, but I think he was from the engineering disciplines. And he wrote that he actually interrupted his survey, and he said that, sorry, this survey is too long. I don't have time for this. Teaching at the blackboard with a chalk is still the best method for me. Thank you very much, and good luck with your studies. So, of course, when I first read that, it was like, okay, where did I go wrong here? But then I kept on thinking about that. And I thought that, well, actually, is he wrong or is he not? What can we learn from this? So on this matter, we still, even though we like to have these student-centered teaching methods and we like to have these ideas as educational scientists, the truth remains that professors, they are the experts of their content and they know how to teach their content. And we as educational scientists would do ourselves and everyone a good favor by first listening to how do they teach, how do they understand, and how have they been doing it for many years, because actually, higher education institutes, universities, are much older than schools. And I'm talking in particular of the Bologna University, the university teaching traditions in Italy and in Greece, they go back centuries. And while schools and school teaching is a rather new thing, so it's around 200, 300 years now that schools have been formally organized by governments. So there is something to be had about that opinion there. Despite this, we do know about learning-focused and content-focused approaches. There is this really nice article that was a very nice base for my PhD as well, who talks about these two different approaches, and she did find that there's a connection between the harder sciences, so engineering and biology and mathematics, that they preferred more a content-focused approach, and while the humanities preferred a more learning-focused approach. And this roughly corresponds to teacher-centered, learner-centered type of teaching. However, the argument behind this is that neither of them are the right way of teaching. They are both important because in the end, you need to make sure as an engineer that the student that you let graduate knows how to build a bridge, and that bridge doesn't collapse in the end. I worked as a lecturer in the nursing department, and so I had to make sure that my students knew their anatomy and physiology and that they knew how to do the drug calculations before they could go into these clinical practices. So content focus is important, and we cannot say that one is better than the other. However, the art of teaching is about finding a balance between the two, and that's why I think everybody can benefit from a little bit of professional development on this subject. So let's go into professors in control. How do they perceive teaching? So why am I embarking in this adventure? I found that there is a research gap in higher education pedagogy on the way that experienced professors teach and professionalize themselves. I mentioned this already, that often they're left out in these initiatives and left to their own devices. I run after them because I find it interesting, and mainly also because most of the studies that I could find, they were about young and entry-level professors. I think there were maximum 2 or 3 studies that were really, truly focusing on actually experienced professors and how do they professionalize themselves. And the aim of this whole thing, so what I did in these last few weeks, I interviewed some senior professors, and I plan to also interview a lot more senior professors over the next few years in order to gain a better understanding of the typical teaching traditions. Today, we're talking about control teaching traditions, but I'm not limiting it to control in the future. I would like to also see other disciplines as well, and how they approach teaching and what are their professional development habits. So today I only have 3 interviews to report on. So these are some preliminary, in inverted commas, findings. And they were all tenured professors with around 10 years more experience of teaching. All three of them were, of course, informed of my intentions to present these results here today. And these interviews, they lasted mainly around an hour, and there was one that was interrupted for, and I think it took around 20 minutes that I had time with this professor. These interviews were actually really informal. I knew these people already, so that's just a disclaimer. All the people that I interviewed, I knew them beforehand. We had a discussion. I took notes while I was doing the interview, and it was really a conversation that we were having on how do you feel about this, how do you feel, and I let them mostly speak. So I was mostly listening, but I did participate in the discussion as well. And just a disclaimer as well, no professors or OpenAI models were harmed in the making of these slides. I did, as you will see in the following slides, use ChatGPT, surprisingly, to generate some nice illustrations for all the quotes that I have. And I did this because mainly I am an illustrator myself, so I know what it is like to illustrate and the amount of time that it goes into it. And I cannot make 30 illustrations on one day. So I wanted to make this a little bit more visual and more interesting. So I asked ChatGPT to help me with this. And so just a disclaimer on that the images are not accurate, and they're not in any way meant to be completely representative. And that's just something to reflect about when I show you the following quotes as well. And also, if any artist out there recognizes any of their work, please let me know and I will credit you afterwards for sure. So discussions with the control professors. What were the questions that I asked? So the first question was about teaching vision. How do you see your role as a professor? The next one was, who inspired you to teach? And then I asked them that, please compare teaching then and now. What has changed since you were a student? And then lastly, I wanted to ask them, how do they think about educational technology and how teaching at the university is organized now? So in the first question, I had Professor A. She said that, well, when I'm in a lecture, I'm tired because it is like a theater. However, when I do this, all the proofs and assumptions are very well written and they're accurate. The third professor, he said that I work very hard in tearing down this barrier that is between me and the students. Professor B said that she likes to use anecdotes because she has really a passion for the teaching and she wants to be open and friendly to transfer this passion to her students. And when she does this, she wants to connect experiences with the theory, and she tries to engage with the students as well. Then back to Professor A. She saw herself as a medieval monk who's copying books and transferring knowledge from one century to the next. And she called herself of the old generation. But in any case, she knows that the trend, and she commented on this, that with younger professor, the trend is knowing less about all the different things, but knowing what they know very well. That's an interesting comment on that. Then Professor B, she likes to use slides, and she likes to use these slides to keep track and to give a clear logic and a story that keeps flowing throughout her lecture, to connect the previous topics and with a wider context with a link of daily life and anecdotes. She also makes her teaching materials online and the videos of her lecture as well available to the students, but she did comment that not many students actually use this. And on to the next question. So what inspired you to teach? Professor A said that, well, I had this prof that was in mechanics. He was very focused on the lecture and he wrote everything on the blackboard. Although nowadays he would be probably considered as old-fashioned. Professor B said that she had this professor of automatic control who was a wonderful teacher, and he made me love the subject and later became my PhD supervisor. And what he managed to do, what was impressive for her, is to make difficult concepts simple so that you can start understanding the details. And often he was digressing during the lectures and giving examples from real life as well. Then the third question, then and now, how it has changed as a student. Professor A said that, professors used to be these charismatic persons like a showman that would enter with a chalk ready in the hand and ready to write and to talk. Professor B said, well, I feel more like a babysitter. And when I was a student, you couldn't disturb the professor. And then it was much more theoretical, and now it is much more practical. But she does feel that the students, they really make the minimum effort just to pass. Professor C said that students, and because he studied in a different country than where he is teaching at the moment, he said that students now are much more professional than he was as a student. He felt that he was just a machine for studying and for passing exams and for learning, whereas the students nowadays, they're not afraid of saying what they think, and he feels that they have a lot more self-efficacy than what he had as a student. Then in the fourth question, I asked them what do they think about educational technology and how it is organized at the university at the moment. Professor A had a lot to say about this. She acknowledged that, yes, you have limited hours to teach your subject, and it's becoming even less and less and less. And so you have to find a good compromise between, knowledge that you might have to sacrifice in favor of fun things. However, she wanted to stress that when you are at a university, you study the theory. You have an obligation to study the theory, and that entertainment is just for elementary school. She also continued that if education is well done, you can manage to maintain the content while making learning a little bit more pleasant. Videos and things like this, they can be fun. And she also even suggested that they can be a complementary or an outreach phase for the students after they have done studying, after they have passed their exams. And she even said that there is a benefit for this because when you do outreach and you have to explain things to people that don't know your subject, it's a good exercise to understand that you know the subject well and that you can explain it in a precise way without compromising the fundamental core knowledge in it. Professor B, she said that the videos of her lectures, they're still a legacy from COVID. However, they seem to only make a difference for the good students. And she also mentioned that in her classroom beforehand, she really saw the traditional bell curve, that you had an evenly distributed population of students. However, this is becoming less and less so the case, and it's becoming more extreme. So I asked her, so what happened to the students in the middle? So maybe because these online materials, they're for self-study, it makes students who are not used to studying by themselves and who don't usually study well by themselves, it makes, in that case, weak students weaker. And a little bit of a disclaimer regarding this image that is generated here. When I asked ChatGPT to give an illustration on this, it said that we don't want to depict struggling, weaker students. It can be sensitive. So I really appreciated that about ChatGPT, that instead of going straight for something ugly or something that could offend some people, there's actually an effort to kind of think a little bit, reflect ethically about the type of images that you produce and how you use them as well. So this was a pleasant surprise that I found, and that's why I'm sharing it in these slides today as well. Then Professor B also continued regarding interactive tools. She also used things like Mentimeter and quizzes. She didn't find that it was really successful with the students. And with the mock exams and self-assessments, again, only the students that are quite strong, they use them to their advantage. And she felt it was like around half of the students that are actually really using them. And what she also said at the end was that, education technology can be useful when you use it with common sense. And I think that is a very nice statement that I would like to frame and put into my office one day. Professor C had a very different opinion about educational technology, which I think is really lovely to share as well today, so I can really share the very different opinions and feelings of the different professors. So there was this great transformation since COVID, especially with ChatGPT. He felt that you can put your slides into ChatGPT and you can generate for yourself assessment materials, and you can study those assessment materials, and it will give you kind of a pretty accurate picture of what will come in the exams. And he believes also that, okay, we can use this to our advantage. We don't have to throw away AI, or we don't have to forbid it from our students, but we can embed it more into our teaching. And so this frees up space. Instead of me as a professor making up exams and spending hours and hours and hours making these exams, I can ask AI to generate this for me, and then I will have more time to spend guiding students and acting more like a mentor to them, and to provide the social and the practical components, which you do not have with AI, of course. But he felt the need to stress that, as teachers, you cannot compete with AI. At this point, I was going to have you guys talk as well, but I will just quickly go into my next slide, and we will then stop the recording after that, and we can talk after that. I guess I can say here, as I mentioned before, I'm also an illustrator, so this is my own illustration, and I think this is where I can say that I need to probably stop. And I think, Anthony, you can then stop the recording. And thank you for listening.